Thank you. So I'm going to talk about making strategy happen with a little bit of twinkle of Hoshin Kanri, some Toyota Kata, some 4 disciplines of execution, and so on, and kind of see if we can mix this together. And I had to check. There's actually no Star Wars Lego minifigures in this presentation. I'm sorry. Yeah. There usually is. But let's start. Once upon a time, there was a president that set a challenge. Anyone know? We should go to the moon and back at the end of the decade, right? A very clear and concise challenge, or you could say a strategy. This is what we want to do in terms of space. So this is one example, and we will use this a little bit through this presentation. So who am I? I'm an Agile coach working at an insurance company in Sweden called Folksam. I've been working with different companies, mostly looking at portfolio level things. One of the gigs that I had, the formal title for that gig was actually Flow Sensei, which was very fun for me. But I acted more like the plumber, which meant that I was trying to get the stuff out of the system that was actually blocking flow of work. I'm a Toyota Kata geek, and I speak at various conferences around a lot of different stuff. And if you haven't noticed yet, I'm a huge Lego fan, but Lego do not sponsor or authorize the content of this presentation in any way. And yes, I've taken all the pictures myself. If not, there's should be like the photo from the moon is not me. Not yet, at least. But let's talk about strategy. Maybe you've heard of this quote from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So why do I talk about strategy then? Well, maybe you can start to think about what actually eats culture for breakfast. And I would say it's about organization-wide behaviors. That will be what actually will beat culture, because the organizational-wide, if we actually align our behaviors, this will eventually become our strategy, or become our culture. So how do we connect this to strategy then? Well, if we look at strategy execution, how we actually execute strategy, from the book 4 Disciplines of Execution, they will talk about executing strategy would be 3 parts: stroke of the pen, behavior change, and the whirlwind. So stroke of the pens would be decisions that you can make, and when the decision is kind of made, it's more or less a reality. You might want to hire more people, you want to enter a new market, you kind of make the decisions. Of course, there typically is some work into that, but you made the decision and now it's in play. The other part would be the whirlwind, the everything days that we need to do just to make the company work or the organization work. And that could be like handling incidents, or handling support tickets, or staff meetings, or daily stand-ups, or whatever it is, kind of our whirlwind. And then the third part would be, what are the things that we need to do in terms of achieving something new, moving somewhere that is not a stroke of the pen, kind of increase customer satisfaction, or improve quality, or reduce lead time, which is one of my favorites. What do you then actually need to do? And it's about behavior change in most cases in the organization. How do we actually change the behavior in the organization to achieve this? So what we need to think about then is that the daily work of each employee, independent where you are in the company, should be divided up in 2 parts. You typically pay a lot of attention to the whirlwind, but you also need to pay attention to the actual change that we want to make. So to make a strategy happen, you need to understand that you need to do both on a daily basis. Otherwise, you typically don't get either survival as a company because you don't do the everyday stuff, or you will not achieve your strategy that you want to have executed. So how do we actually do this then? I think this is 3 parts. Something that I call hypothesis-driven. You need to have alignment and then create some daily habits. So let's dive in hypothesis-driven. So what do I mean by hypothesis-driven? Well, it's a systematically experiment to learn what means generate what results. And then test and verify, don't assume. And what I mean with this is, if you think about everything, every decision you make is an hypothesis, then you actually need to verify that that decision, when you execute it on, is actually getting the results that you want. So you need to test and verify it, because if you just assume and just do, it's very often that you actually don't achieve what you want to achieve. Because in the beginning, when you make the decision, is typically when you know the least. So what we want to go through is all the time, you state something as an hypothesis, you make a clear prediction what you think will happen, you run an experiment, you closely observe what happens, and the delta between your prediction and your observation would be your potential learning. So you want you to go through this process, every decision that you make in the organization, every more or less step that you take. I talked about means connecting to results. This is a model that we use in my current company. And it talks about you have values. Those values give you some principles. But the principles themselves, how we state the principles, will also affect the values. And the principles typically form how we do things, the means, how we do things. And hopefully those means will need to lead to some result. And the opposite set, if we have some results, and we want to achieve some certain results, we might need to change the means, how we get there, which might affect the principles of how we think about things, which might affect our values. So having this model and think about how you act as an organization, using this model can be really useful. And one of the core ideas, I think, from at least the lean community is you should focus on the means rather than the outcome. Outcome is a result of what you do. So you think there is a correlation between what you do would lead to a certain result. And this is the fundamental underlying hypothesis based on the rest of this talk. And means, how we do things, can be observed with something calling leading indicators. And the outcome would be lagging indicators. And this basically means the leading indicators are things that we can observe right now that we believe would lead to a result in the future. Another metaphor might be you want to move that rock. So the movement of that rock is a lagging measure. And pulling this lever here, you believe if I pull it here, the rock will move. And what we want to do in the organization is to create these hypotheses around how we can move the rock by doing a certain action. But because we are living in a complex adaptive system, many times we don't know exactly how this connection works in your organization. And there might be many levers that actually needs to be moved to move that rock. Another metaphor, we want to spin the leading measures a lot to move the lagging measure a little bit. And sometimes we spin the leading indicators here a lot, or the leading measures, but they are actually not connected here. So we want to find if there's a connection or not. So, hypothesis means leads to a certain result. That's the hypothesis. And we then actually have to make a prediction. We actually do the means, and we observe and see what happens, and that is our learning. So we come back to the hypothesis thinking around how we execute things. So that's the first part of it, thinking about everything as an hypothesis. The second part is alignment. Can anyone think about what this picture is supposed to dictate? I think I heard something like Spice Girls. Yeah? Cool. So what's the Spice Girls question? Yeah? Exactly. And that's the second part of strategy execution. How do we actually answer this question in an organization? And this is where Hoshin Kanri, or strategy deployment, comes in. How do we actually align the organization around what we really want? And Hoshin Kanri strategy deployment is kind of a planning process or a dialogue process where you come up with a line set of actions that you want to take, or means that you believe will lead to a result. One important part about this is the importance of focus. The number of challenges, if you set 11 to 20 challenges, you typically achieve 0. If you set 4 to 10, you probably get 1 or 2 of them if you execute, but randomly it will be one of those 4 to 10. But if you set something like 1 to 3, you probably get something like 1 to 3 of those challenges being achieved. And this is based on the research done by Franklin Covey in the book 4 Disciplines of Execution. And I must say, my experience with organization, this is also something that I've experienced. So how do we do this? What we want to do is to have an alignment of the strategic challenges by being very clear, just like JFK was about the space race. He created a clarity in the organization, what they wanted to achieve. But you also want to have actions in the organization that actually supports that challenge. So how do we engage all the people in the organization to actually work on the same challenge and support it? So the process here is if you have a hierarchical organization or you have some relationships like this, is that someone, typically a leader, will challenge with what and why, and you challenge each part of the organization. And then the team, dependent on where they are in the organization, they will then respond with a how and the feedback on that challenge. And the leader can veto the how they set up what they want to do, but they can't dictate what to do. So, and usually in most organizations, the veto comes in play very seldom. But if you don't see how it's connected and the dialogue in that is not clear, the leaders can veto, but they can't dictate what the organization will actually do. So how could this look like? Well, maybe a manager then challenge, we should go to the moon and back. How do you think that this should be achieved? Well then, the organization or the managers or the structure, that the team that you have responds with the how and feedback on that challenge. And maybe the response is, yeah, we need rockets to take off without exploding. And you as a manager was thinking, well, I was actually thinking that the next step here would be to have human in space. Don't we actually have rockets that work already? Excuse me. So here, the role of the manager would be, the first response would be, okay, what am I not understanding when I get this response? Is it that the challenge is unclear, or do I not understand the current situation? So the natural response here should not be to just veto. You should actually go into a dialogue and ask clarifying questions and potentially adjust your challenge. So here again, hypothesis driven. And what and why? That's your hypothesis. And then you make a prediction of what do you think the response will be. Then you give the challenge, and then you listen to the how and feedback coming back. And the delta between your prediction as a leader and what you get back is your potential learning. So here again, we are thinking in hypothesis, and we try to align the organization around a common challenge that we want to achieve. And here the organization responds in how they actually think that they will support this challenge. The third part, daily habits. Can anyone think about what movie this one would come from? Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe. Karate Kid, yeah? It's the first or the second version? First one, the good one, right? That dates me a little bit. Yeah, so what I want to say about this is, can you remember what happened in the movie here? He didn't want to do it, but eventually he did, right? And he was waxing the hood of the car, if I remember correctly. But actually, he learned a muscle memory how to block kicks and punches by doing these patterns. I'm not sure it works, but it was a great part of the movie. Especially if you kind of connect it to Toyota Kata. And here's like, this is what you would call confirmation bias, or like that it actually works. But Toyota Kata talks about creating muscle memory for continuous improvements. By instilling a certain pattern in your organization, behavior pattern, you will build an organization that can actually do some continuous improvements. And I would actually say it's not about continuous improvements, it's about continuous learning. And then let's see what the Toyota Kata or the improvement Kata is in a nutshell. It contains about 2 parts, a planning phase and an execution phase. Thank you. Thank you very much. And in the planning phase, we have understanding the direction. We have grasping the current condition and setting a target condition. If we look back to when we talked about alignment, you could say, especially, these 3 parts here is a lot about the alignment part that we talked about in the previous section. So if you combine the Hoshin Kanri and the challenge thinking, you connect this into Toyota Kata, those steps. That's the planning phase. And the next phase here, which I find Toyota Kata to be very powerful, is the experiment phase. And then this model also says, when you reach your target condition, a step on the journey, or it expires, you loop out and you repeat. And this is a scientific routine for achieving tough goals. One other way to think about it is you set a vision, you have a current condition, you aim towards the vision, and you set challenges and what Toyota Kata would talk about target conditions on the way. Another way to talk about it, a vision. We should boldly go where no brick has been before. Okay, so where's the current condition? Well, we have rockets that they may or may not explode on the launch. Someone sets a challenge. And then we need to set target conditions to kind of reach the goal. So then the question is, do you think moving from a current condition to our challenge is a straight arrow like this? That's almost a rhetorical question, especially having Dave Snowden starting out this conference, right? No, it's more like this, very unclear. And what you want to do, you might want to set the challenge, something to aim for. It might not be the right one, but you want to aim for something, and then you kind of step in and adjust based on what's actually happening. And to do this movement and going through this, we do the last thing here in the Toyota Kata, and you do experimentation. So the question then is, what is an experiment? Well, an experiment is actually a verb, meaning that we will actually try something in order to discover what it's like or to find out more about something. So experiments is about doing. This is the habit. So we want to run experiments. And the experiments that we set up should be good enough for now, safe enough to try. Have you heard about this concept? This comes back maybe a little bit to psychological safety. We should do something that is safe to fail. The challenge with using the word fail is that it might invoke the wrong neural pathways in your brain. So when I talk about fail, when we are done experimentation, I will jump forward here. When we talk about fail, it's actually an acronym and not an actual word. And this is a challenge in most organizations, is that we are not safe enough in the organization to actually fail, because there's a implied, if you don't get the results that you want, that's you haven't done your work. But actually, we should expect at least 50% of the experiments that we run will actually not get the expected result, because this is when we really learn. So how do we do this in Toyota Kata? Here's just an example of a potential storyboard about this. We have a target condition, what we want to achieve. Here's our current condition, and then we run experiments. And what we want to do is basically, we have our current condition here, and we have our target condition, and all the red bricks here are obstacles standing in the way, that we believe are standing in the way from us being up here. So then we want to address, with one experiment at a time, to address these obstacles. And if you noticed, sometimes you have a big obstacle when you define it in the beginning, and when you start experiment, it will actually change in nature and become smaller, and maybe new things will come up. And this is basically, from my point of view, a complex adaptive system. So as you move through your obstacles, new obstacles will come up. You will get side effects that you didn't expect. Therefore, you don't plan the steps that you will do ahead. You will just collect the obstacles and then address one at a time that you think will move yourself closer to the actual target condition. And target condition is kind of a challenge on the way to the bigger challenge. So how do we actually make strategy happen then? From my point of view, think about being hypothesis driven. align your organization around your challenges using something similar to Hoshin Kanri, and then build some daily habits. Kata might be your daily habits, and this will really help you. So I think you should try to think about every decision as a hypothesis that you need to test. Create alignment on the Spice Girls question using dialog. Means that you are challenging, and then the response you get back might help you to learn more, and then you might want to clarify. And then establish some daily habits to execute in the midst of the whirlwind. And hopefully, you will get to the moon. Thank you.